Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bankroll Burners, the podcast for poker players who can't stop getting it in bad. I'm Mike,
And I'm Josh.
and as always, we are going to be bringing you some hands that we've played recently. We're going to be dissecting them, two hands each. They're not hands we've shared with each other before, so these are fresh, live reactions of a donk to another donk's play.
Yeah, as much as we try and talk every week about our poker hands, I still find myself in spots regularly where I'm like, "Wow, what am I doing?" And then proceed to get totally owned. So excited to share that a couple times.
Yeah, absolutely. The play has not improved. Don't you worry. We do apologize for our absence last week. Just had a bunch of stuff going on, but we're back at it again. And I
Yes,
think,
if you well, and let me agree with Mike there and say if you've listened to this podcast at all, you can probably tell that poker is not our job because if it were, we would probably both be destitute. So sometimes life gets in the way, but here we are, ready to bring back some hands. I'll kick it off in a hand where a pretty fun hand. It's a 1-3 game at Encore Boston Harbor, which is probably I think it's my most played casino this year. Just because it's close, it's convenient, and the games have been actually quite good recently. Even on weekdays, which is mostly when I've been playing weekdays after work, the games have been quite solid. There have been a number of action players. There have also been a couple games that have been really interesting because the people who play kind of know something about poker and are like clearly have studied some strategy, but still aren't good, like myself included, very, very much included. But sometimes it's fun to talk with people who kind of have some interest in poker and talk about old school pros and streams and videos and bloggers and kind of all that fun stuff and kind of get to talk about hobbies instead of people who really have no idea what's going on.
yeah, absolutely. It's, poker, as Doug Polk tweeted earlier today, poker is a social game, and, it's nice to have conversations at the table.
Exactly. Well, in this particular hand, this is not one of those tables as it happens. This is more of a fun table. There are kind of a few like college people who I would assume are like college kids and don't really play much, having a fun night out. A couple older folks who maybe play a decent amount, but are definitely more fun players. And a couple of cool players as well. It's a great table. I definitely had a good time at this table. This hand is going to start with a couple limps, and in this hand we're going to be 350 effective in a 1-3 game. So usually playing around 100 big blinds deep, sometimes actually quite deeper. The max buy-in in this game is 500, which I typically buy in for. And I'd say most people usually buy in between three and $500, or they're buying in super short stacked with like 100.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's 100 big blinds, quote unquote, but the open size is more like a 2-5 game. So you can think about it as in some ways it's like 60 big blinds. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because the standard open is definitely 20. So it is kind of interesting. Yeah, standard open is 15 or like 20 over limps. I've seen all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, in this hand, it's going to start with 2 limps from the under the gun 1 and under the gun 2 positions. Hero is in middle position with ace queen of diamonds, and I bump it up to 20.
Nice hand, a very nice hand to open the pot with.
And to maybe nobody's surprise, both limpers call.
Well, you didn't get any calls behind you, so at least there's that.
Yeah, I mean, we're in position, which is awesome. We're very, very glad about that. The two people who limp probably don't have super strong hands. Almost certainly. Although I did see a number of people limp call. I saw a guy like limp call aces in this session, so you never know.
Well, that's special, but I think mostly discountable for the I don't think you can ever like include aces in someone's limp call range. If they got it, you're probably not going to win a big pot off you anyway. So.
Exactly. So we're off to the flop, which comes 10 of clubs, 8 of diamonds, deuce of diamonds. So we've got 2 overs and the nut flush draw.
Great. And if you think about how this board interacts with your villains' ranges, I mean, they're going to have a bunch of random suited junk. So they could have some worse flush draws, which is obviously the ideal situation. They could certainly have a lot of first or top and second pairs, I don't have a lot of bottom pair. I don't see people very often like limp calling deuce X unless it's specifically ace deuce suited, which there's only
Still, all three combos
there's
are.
3 combos of that. So, but basically, and then they're just gonna have a bunch of offsuit broadways that totally whiff this board.
Absolutely. So at this point, there's 60 in the pot or so, and the first limper checks. But before it gets to me, the second limper bets out for 25, which is around half pot. Not the super small donk size that you often see.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this seems like a protection bet, I would say, with a 10 very, very oftenly. I mean, it could certainly be a gutter or an open-ended straight draw. I feel like I very rarely see flush draws played this way.
Yeah, I feel like I do see it sometimes because I will say a lot of folks are not a big fan of check raising with draws. And so, they, rather than check call, they might kind of try to get the initiative by just betting the flush draw and take advantage of the fold equity.
Sure, and kind of name their price, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that, that's certainly one option. So at this point, I like to just call. I think my hand is very strong, and I don't think I really need to start turning it into a bluff at this point. I don't want to fold out worse flush draws. I just have so many outs, and I'm in position for the rest of the hand, and I'm, I think that I have a lot of better bluffs that I can use here.
For sure. I mean, you have worse flush draws, which, although again, those might be better played as just a call because you don't necessarily want to get yourself into a flush over flush type of situation. You might just be able to call those too and sort of evaluate. Would you be raising with like King 10, Ace 10 here? I assume you're raising sets.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely raising sets. I'm probably raising over pairs. 10x, probably doing some mixing. But I think I think there are a couple aspects where, yes, I definitely, worse flush draws, we do want to be aware of getting overflushed 100 big blinds deep. But definitely some better ace high flush draws also, like weaker aces, like suited wheel aces or ace 7, ace 6, just because it unblocks his queen high flush draws, so easier to cooler someone. And it's also just a weaker hand if he's somehow got some weird, ace 9 or something funky that he's just deciding to donk with. I actually do want to be able to beat any of his random ace high junky air balls.
Definitely. Last thing I'll say too is if you had a straight draw here, like an open-ended straight draw, I'd be much more inclined to raise because you want to get the other guy out of the pot. I mean, your hand with a straight draw, your hand really suffers from the lost equity of someone sticking around with a flush draw maybe, whereas then that's going to really decrease your outs with your straight draw. So I think just calling with a straight draw here would be a mistake, but your hand actually is not worried about anything.
Yeah, I think I was actually going to point out, I think Queen Jack here is a great raise, just for example, because you kind of block a lot of his best tens that he's going to have, meaning he has fewer combinations of Jack 10 and Queen 10. You've got a gut shot straight draw that will make the nuts when it hits, or will make the best possible straight rather, not necessarily the nuts. And you've got 2 overcards, which may very well be live. So a hand like that, I'd be much more inclined to turn into a bluff than this particular hand.
Cool. So I like your call. What happens?
I call and the other limper folds.
Nice.
And by the way, I think it's probably fine to raise here too. Then we'll just have to raise more value.
Yeah, I mean, if you told me you raised, I wouldn't think that was bad. I agree with your selection that this is better played as a call. Also, the SPR is it's 6 or 7x on the flop, so it is actually going to take a bit of work to get all the money in. That is just the last consideration, but you are in position, so it's going to be easier.
Yep. So now there's about 300 behind. There's a little over 100 in the pot, and the turn is going to roll off the deuce of clubs, which introduces a backdoor flush draw, and it pairs the bottom card. So the board now 10 of clubs, 8 of diamonds, deuce of clubs. Hero has ace queen of diamonds, and the villain is not done betting. He's going to make it 50. And it is also not a donk bet same bet, as we've discussed on the podcast before. This player is increasing their bet sizing, and he's making it 50. It's again about a half pot bet, a little bit under. Proportionally, it's about the same size.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting sizing, because if you were going to raise, here, you could like either min click or jam. Those are kind of your options.
Right.
And min if you made it like 100, that's probably okay. If he calls, you end up with like 300 in the middle and 200 behind. But I wouldn't make it. I certainly wouldn't like 3x because you're just gonna like it's gonna be very weird.
Yeah, and I probably wouldn't min click it. Yeah, I don't think this is really a board where we want to do a whole lot of min clicking. Like I don't think we're gonna have a lot of fold equity most of the time. And I feel like if we're gonna min click, we'll be better off just calling because like we still have a lot of outs most likely, and we are getting a pretty good price. And our hand could still be good theoretically, like some of the time. So I'd probably rather just call if we were going to min click, but jamming certainly is a consideration.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like what are the hands he's doing this with? At this point, he could definitely have a 10. He could probably have two pair. At this point is I feel like he probably isn't doing this with like 10-7.
Well, I would say two pair is actually unlikely here because I think a lot of players actually slow down when they have a hand like if villain's primary two pair here is like 10-8. A lot of villains are going to slow down when the card that is not their two pair pairs because they now lose to any overpair that I can have.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't sure how much credit you're giving this guy.
That's I think he is. I mean, I will say I think he's definitely this player, I guess I'll give some context, is definitely a very high VPIP player, which means voluntarily put chips in pot. It means he is playing a lot of hands pre-flop. He's doing a lot of limp calling. He's doing some raising. He likes seeing flops. I do think he is like aware and like at the basic level where he would definitely be thinking like, oh, he could have X overpair and might be less inclined to barrel that second street.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, I've seen many live low stakes villains just aren't like.
Yeah, I'd say he's definitely been playing a good amount. Like I would guess that he's played the game for a while. He knows what's up, but he maybe isn't doing studying or taking it super seriously, which of course totally fine.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay, all right. So you're right. Probably doesn't have two pair. Probably doesn't have 10s. Might have 8s. Making a boat here. So,
yeah, and if he did have like ace deuce suited, obviously there are fewer combinations of that now. There are only 2 possible ace deuce suited he can have, but that is another candidate where he could have tripped up and be betting now.
But I don't know that he would donk that hand.
That's true. He's blocking aces.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. Where have we heard that before? Yeah, I would write off trips here for the most part. I mean, you're probably right. If he's an aware player, he's not going to have two pair. Then he's going to have a set, which is very, very small slivers of sets. So probably, I'm thinking like King 10 offsuit is like the most likely hand. Something like that, like King 10 offsuit, Queen 10 offsuit, like a strong 10 certainly would be the most likely value hand for him to have here. I don't know. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I guess he could be doing this with two pair. And of course, he could also be doing this. We've seen many instances of villains taking this sort of line with like a pocket pair. Like maybe if he's got like pocket 9s, that could be a candidate where he's just kind of like continuing to bet to see where he's at. Maybe like I say 9 specifically because it's second pair. Once you kind of get below that 8 and you're in third pair territory, I think people are kind of less likely to fire the second barrel.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, it is worth noting that, your outs are the same against King 10 and 10-8 anyway. So
yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, it's interesting. So what are you thinking to do at this point?
I think so. I was in the moment. I wound up calling, so I was leaning towards calling. And I thought, I'm getting a really good price. I have a bunch of outs. There's going to be some amount of time where the river comes a brick and it goes check check and we win. If he's got like a open ender, for example, he can definitely have like a Jack 9, a 9-7 that he might do this with. He might have Queen Jack himself, although of course I have a Queen, so that's a little bit less likely. And I mean, if he's just got a 10, we've got 15 outs, so we're priced in to just call.
Sure.
So that's kind of what I was thinking. I guess 14 if we assume the 10 of diamonds is not live, but he's still betting less than half pot, which means we only need to have the bet. We only need to win this hand, less than 25% of the time for it to be a profitable call.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. We are just getting the direct odds to call. It is interesting to think about realizing our equity it's going to be, even though we're in position, if the river bricks out, um, you know, are you have a pretty bad bluff catcher.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
we block some bluffs, and we don't block a ton of value. We pretty much block ace 10 and queen 10.
right. So, you know, but I guess even if you're always going to fold river when you don't hit, you do have getting the direct odds. I guess it does make sense to just call here.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's another spot too where, because my hand is going to be sometimes good at showdown if it does go check check, I guess I was kind of thinking, similarly to how I was thinking on the flop, I can have better bluffs here. But it's actually an interesting point that I didn't consider in the moment that I'm just now thinking is, if I was bluffing off a lot of those hands on the flop that were worse hands, hands like Queen Jack or Jack 9 or something like that, then I don't have those hands so much here on the turn after just calling the flop. So now what are my best bluffs? And maybe now is the time where we should be check raising or jamming some of our weak flush draws, but because those hands actually now have fold equity against a higher flush draw,
mm-hmm.
versus on the flop where the villain might be less inclined to fold when it's not an all-in sizing.
Yeah, I mean, the other question here is like how credible jamming is. It's like what are the value combos here? It's like I guess it's just your overpairs that you would maybe jam.
Right, exactly. I think I'd probably just be jamming any overpairs that I decided to flat with, because I do feel like when you're in position on a flop, and like especially when you're not that deep, when you have the ability to get it in, when you're 100 big blinds or less, or as you say, with the large open size, it's even effectively less. I don't mind doing a good amount of flatting on the flop against a donk, just because those ranges are often relatively weak or capped. And so you do try and want to keep their hands in and pressure them on later streets.
Yeah, it is. It's just interesting because it's multi-way on the flop, and you might it's pretty bad for you if you call when the other guy calls. But
yeah, that's true.
I think it's not crazy to think you have some overpairs to jam here. So, you can have some jams here, but ultimately I think that you're right that. You were right at first, thinking like you're literally getting the direct odds to just call here with your hand. You might even be good if it goes check check. So I think calling is right.
Do you think the reasoning is okay that we could be jamming like straight draws on the or not jamming, but raising straight draws on the flop, and then raising sort of weaker flush draws here as our bluff candidates, given that we won't have those straight draws?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly reasonable. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we just call. I just felt a little weird because I was like, oh, I don't know, what am I supposed to do? But anyway, there's now the SPR is still around 1. That's the stack to pot ratio. Even with us just flatting twice, the pot is now a hair over 200. The effective stack is just over 250. So we shouldn't have any trouble. I mean, we can get all the money in if we so desire on the river.
Maybe, yeah.
As it so happens, we do not so desire on the river, as the river rolls off the deuce of spades. So the board is now 10-8 deuce, deuce, deuce. And the villain bets 100, which again is about that just under half pot sizing.
He really likes that. Yeah, I mean, it is a little. It just show like it's just a 10 at this point is like the only value hand that he would play this way. It's just a 10. I mean, I guess also pocket eights. I don't know. This doesn't change that much.
And I do wonder if villain would
less likely he's bluffing. To be honest with you,
I would say I do feel like villain might be jamming pocket eights here. If I were villain, I would certainly jam pocket eights here. If you have multiple sizing, it's like again, if you're somewhat aware. Some people may not even realize that pocket eights beats pocket aces on this board.
Right.
But it does. Pocket eights is pretty much the second. Is very, very strong here because you have eights full of deuces. Any other pocket pair is deuces full, so the eights would win. So I would suspect I kind of discounted those sets because I was like, I feel like he'd be jamming a lot or like betting larger, but maybe not. Maybe it's a sort of a milky bet.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's like, okay, well, if he has a 10 here, what I mean, obviously you have. I guess like what are your good calls? Like, what's your good bluff catcher here? I mean, is he ever value owning himself here with a 10? Like, do you ever show up with jacks right now?
Right, and probably not that much because I'm probably jamming those a decent amount. on the turn, but I maybe can have some amount. I can have a lot of 10x myself, especially sort of weaker 10x that I might not raise off. A hand like 10-9, Jack 10, hands that are kind of middling 10s. But obviously now the kicker of the 10 doesn't matter. We're all playing deuces. We'd all be playing deuces full of 10s. So I think I do have a lot of those hands, like 10x and some amount of pairs. Is there any merit to jamming here, or is that doesn't make any sense? Because I was kind of rolling through all three options in my hand where I was like, I just feel like I don't have any fold equity if I jam, basically.
Yeah,
so
what do you rep?
One thing basically be a third pot jam, which is quite small.
Anything that you beat everything
that's folding
that
to a jam.
would fold to a jam. You already beat.
Reason, unless he's making a sick own with like pocket threes, which is very unlikely.
I guess if he has if he has nines here, that's nuts. But
so I was thinking about calling because I was like, well, the story is not that credible, but at the same time, it's tough to know exactly what each person's sort of limp calling range looks like. But in general, they certainly do have a lot of tens, and I feel like I've fallen into the trap a lot of saying like, well, if they get here with all this 10x, then they have to get here with all sorts of garbage that they're betting, which is just not always true and very, very player dependent.
Yeah, I just think it sucks to have diamonds. You do block ace 10, queen 10, but a lot of the hands you show up here with that. Do you have bluff catchers that aren't 10x? Are you going to call here with nines?
I don't know. I don't know that I have to.
Okay. Maybe... Well, then if you're not going to call with nines, I don't think you would call with ace queen.
Yeah. That's reasonable. Yeah. Or like 8x, but I might fold 8. I might have 8x too. Oh, maybe 8.
Ace 8, 8, 9, 8, 7.
Yeah, maybe 8, 9 is a good bluff catcher. But anyway, I think you're right. I think the ace highs are just slightly too weak, especially holding diamonds. If I wanted to make this call,
maybe.
If I wanted to make this call, I should probably do so without a diamond, or if the 10 is a diamond, because villain could also have 10x of diamonds in this case. So it'd probably be better for me to call if the 10 wasn't a diamond, because then villain can't take this line with 10x of diamonds.
So and it's ace. It's the 10 of clubs, correct? So,
right.
So is ace queen of clubs a better call? You're blocking his backdoor flush draws, but you don't block the front door.
Probably.
Yeah, I don't know. Seems fine to just fold this. Maybe you're gonna get owned, but I don't know. You'll just have better stuff here. A lot. You have a lot of tens.
It sounds like you kind of want to call.
Part of me does but I think I just let this go.
Cool. Well, that's what I do. We fold and we do get super owned as villain shows 5-7 offsuit.
Okay.
So he had a sick bluff, and then he stacked me about 10 minutes later when he turned trips.
Got him. Yeah. That's fine. I do think his line is weird, but it's not crazy. It's not a crazy line with a 10. So
exactly right. It's. I'd be a lot more inclined to call if and not in this exact scenario, but I think we went through we've gone through a couple of hands on this podcast where I've kind of called. And maybe shouldn't have, but it was more sort of a live read of being like, this line is super weird, overcards keep coming out, and this guy keeps taking weird sizings when there are just very, very few. He's repping a very thin range for value. Whereas in this case, the board doesn't really change. He could definitely play a 10 this way the whole way. It's not like overcards came out to the 10 and he kept betting, which is a much more suspicious line.
Right.
So, well, cool. Let's move on. Thanks for chatting through that.
Yeah, definitely. So... Okay, well, I have, so to our audience who loved that hand and is liking and subscribing to this video as we speak, we have some exciting news, which is we purchased a cheap poker solver to finally learn how to play poker somewhat mildly better.
Well, let's not go that far.
Yeah, maybe. But we did purchase the lowest tier subscription to GTO-X, which is an awesome solver made by Finding Equilibrium. Go check out his channel if you haven't. He makes awesome videos with cool visuals. And the GTO-X solver is great. And this is a hand the hand that I'm going to talk about now is one that I ran through the solver to kind of learn a bit more about. A lot of the hands we play that we bring on this podcast aren't solvable because they're multi-way post-flop, and that technology is still pretty new-ish, not very common out there. But when the opportunity is there, when we have a heads-up post-flop situation, we'd like to bring on the solver a little more, right, Josh?
Yeah, exactly. And for those of you who don't know what a solver is or how it works, we will do our best to put out a short video in the near future that explains briefly what they are in a little bit more detail. But essentially, it's like you basically have a computer play a lot of poker against itself to learn sort of the optimal strategy, the unexploitable strategy for how to maximize the expected value of a hand. And a lot of this is not really humanly reproducible because it will say like, with all your hand, with some set of hands, you should bet 150% of the pot 1% of the time. And like, you obviously as a human, you are just never going to be able to actually replicate that correctly, but there are a lot of lovely learnings you can take from it and understand how to sort of simplify what it's telling you and try and use it to improve your game. So, it's not just a thing that you can just take at face value and try to implement because it will go poorly, but there are a lot of interesting things you can learn from it, and we'll try and give you a little more information on them and get a little bit more in depth in sort of its own dedicated space to avoid bloating this video any more than it already is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we don't get too much in the weeds, but definitely exciting to sort of see the concepts the solver applies to the hands we play. So, without further ado, so this hand is played in our online home game, and this is a 25-cent, 50-cent game. These are action-y games. There's no cap. People buy in for whatever. Most commonly, people will buy in for 200 big blinds or 100 big blinds. But people will sometimes buy in for 400 big blinds or 500.
Sometimes people will buy in for like $1,000.
Yeah, shout out to Boobert, who was on this podcast a few months ago and enjoys doing that. So in this hand, we are, like I said, 25 cent, 50 cent. We are $115 effective with the main villain. And we are going to be 9-handed. And we're sitting in let me see, let me get my notes out here. We're gonna be in late position here on the button. Sorry, I wasn't sure if it was cut off or button here. Sorry. We're on the button. So we're on the button, and we have an open to $2, which is a little bigger than normal. Most people open to $1.50, but I'm not reading too much into this. So we have an open to $2 from the under the gun, from the low jack.
Okay.
And it folds to us on the button. No reads on this particular villain, by the way. Folds to us on the button. We have Jack 10 of clubs, which is a hand we will sometimes flat here, but I do elect to bump it up given the stack depth to $6.
Okay, makes sense. Totally agree. This is a hand that you can certainly mix in some flats, especially on the button, but happy to raise. Obviously, the hand can suffer from a few reverse implied odds at times, but somewhat rarely.
Yeah, I think it does block a decent amount of the nut flushes that early position players can show up with. It blocks, ace jack and ace 10 suited. It does also always make the nuts straight, which is nice. So
yes, absolutely. Happy to be 3-betting this hand a good portion of the time.
So this is nothing too weird. Folds back to the original opener, who 4-bets to $15. So
okay. And I will confess that my 4-bet sizing is fully unstudied, but this seems a little small.
It's actually a little big.
Okay.
From my recollection, but only a little. I think you're supposed to go 2.4x out of position and 2.25x in position.
Oh, so he went 2.5x.
Yeah, I think this is pretty normal. When you're cold 4-betting, it's weird. You're supposed to go a little larger. This is my recollection anyway, but I don't think there's anything odd about the sizing. The reason you're allowed to go smaller when 4-betting is because it's insanely polar. Like there is no such thing as like a merged 4-betting range, right? It's always very polar.
If you polarize, shouldn't we be going bigger?
Well, you don't have to, is sort of the point, because it's polar anyway. That's kind of the idea. That's how
Okay.
it's busy.
Well, don't take our word for it, to our listeners. If you've taken our word for anything, I'm sorry, but especially in this
Yeah.
case,
Um,
Google exists for a reason. We refuse to use it, but you shouldn't.
yeah, you can definitely Google this, and I think it does. Normally in a hand though, you would use large sizing to sort of indicate polarity, right? But
Right.
here it doesn't matter. So,
Okay,
um,
so I assume we call because now we're getting a great price. We're in position. We have a hand that plays pretty well against on sort of Broadway boards against a four betting range.
yeah, I think this is a fine call. I think if we were 100 big blinds deep, this would be a fold for sure. But at this depth, this just seems like a fine call. So we do.
Okay.
We do make a call. And the flop is a pretty interesting one. It's King of Hearts, 8 of Clubs, 7 of Hearts.
King of Hearts, 8 of Clubs, 7 of Hearts. So we have Jack 10 of Clubs, which means we've got a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw.
Correct. And any queen or ace will give us some equity as
Or Jack or 10.
That's true. Yeah, so I like this flop. Bottom line, I mean, it could be better, but I like it.
And what does the low jack do at this point?
So here's where it gets interesting. Villain checks.
Okay, that is interesting because I would assume that on a king high board in a 4-bet pot, you would think that the 4-better would be doing quite a lot of betting.
Yeah, I actually looked this up in the solver, so we can consult the solver here. And the solver is actually betting this board 100% of the time. It is not checking ever.
And what sizing is it taking?
It is mixing some sizings, but it is mostly, and probably you can simplify your strategy here, it is mostly taking a smaller sizing. It's betting with pretty much its entire range. It is betting 20 big blinds is what I've got here. So that's a third pot, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And that makes sense. So villain checking is certainly interesting. I mean, with no reads on the player, you would kind of go either way and think, maybe... I guess the hands that I would kind of think about villain having a lot here when he checks are going to be hands like pocket queens, pocket jacks, pocket tens, sort of pocket pairs below the king, or top set.
Yeah, top set was like the first thing that came to mind for me. I was like, he may have top set here. He also could have a hands like queens or jacks. I mean, I am blocking jacks, of course. I will say that when it's sort of an earlier position raise, you are sort of required to 4-bet like hands like queens, whereas when it's later position, you might not as much, if I'm remembering this right, because oh no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking the reverse.
Yeah,
It's the reverse. You don't have to 4-bet queens or jacks from when you open earlier position because you have your range is just so tight, so you're allowed to have more flats.
Correct. Or if like the big blind 3-bets, the big blind 3-betting is like the most polarizing of the positions. So if the big blind 3-bets, I think you're also allowed to play a lot tighter in sort of your 4-betting range.
Right. So, yeah. So he doesn't necessarily have queens or jacks here. Bottom line, he may have just flatted those hands, but he'll probably have some, and he could have some top set. He could also just have like ace queen suited, just like of spades.
That's true, but something that I heard, it kind of heard explained to me, and I kind of took to heart and thought that's probably true. Is villains who are kind of aware enough to be doing 4-betting, which is already cuts out quite a segment of people, tend to barrel misses a lot.
Yeah,
like total misses, hands like ace queen, because you want that fold equity against any sort of misses your opponent has. Or like
definitely. I would say he can have those hands. I mean, so I guess in the game I interpreted this check as fairly polarizing. I was like, it seems like he's doing this with like total ass or top set.
Yep.
But in solver land, there is no check, so it's definitely pretty interesting. But the solver is checking actually with 0.04% of its range. So there you go.
And this is exactly what I'm saying. Maybe villain is just trying to implement the solver perfectly and rolled a check.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you do? So given that a villain's so polar, does that kind of lead you to want to check back and try and realize your equity?
That's what I thought about in game, and that's what I did. Do you think that makes sense?
I think it does, because I mean, I do. Well, it's interesting because we are still losing to all the misses, And like folding out a hand like ace queen is obviously very good for us.
Mm-hmm.
Or pocket queens for that matter. But definitely, we have we have a lot of equity with this hand, and it would really suck to get blown off it because we obviously can never call a check raise. Yes,
absolutely.
So I'm pretty happy to check back with this particular hand. Maybe like a hand like Jack 10 of Hearts, I think we can do a lot of betting because we also want to fold out those hands, and we can call a check raise.
Yeah, definitely. I think. Yeah, I really wanted to see if the turn gave me any equity. That was sort of what was on my mind in this moment. I was like, well, I have a trash hand here, like right now, but it could certainly improve. And if it improves, I can structure some double barrels. And I think if I go bet turn, bet river, I can fold out a lot of pocket queens, to be honest with you.
And we have a lot of hands that are going to want to do that for value. Note the hands I'm thinking about are hands like king, queen suited. Maybe pocket queens ourselves, where if we get checked to again on the turn, we're going to want to start betting for value. So I think we can definitely down the road continue to play this in a relatively balanced fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do check, and what's interesting is, it's sort of you immediately have to take the solver with a grain of salt because we're already in sort of like something the solver hasn't considered, like doesn't happen basically according to the solver. Like villain should never check here, but in the 0.04% of the times that they do check, the solver almost pure checks back with a very little EV regret, which is sort of like how much EV do you lose, how much estimated value, how much money do you lose, really, by taking a strategy with your whole range. So if you check your whole range back here, if I were to check my whole range back, lose very little EV, about 4%.
But I would agree with you that once we're in the 0.04% of the low jack's hands, we're probably already starting to leave the realm of solvers being super useful.
Absolutely. I just thought it was sort of an interesting, I did think it was interesting to see what it did, but you're right.
Yeah, so let's move on to the turn. What do we pick up some equity?
So the turn comes the Queen of Diamonds.
Okay, so kind of a really interesting card because a lot of his misses that he may have wanted to check have now gotten there in some way, whether making second pair in a hand like ace queen, picking up equity with a hand like ace jack, or making a set with pocket queens.
Definitely, yeah. But it, of course, also introduces for me an open-ended straight draw, which I'm relatively pleased about. And now villain goes ahead and bets here. Villain bets 1350, so about 40% pot.
Okay.
Doing my math right. Which I did think was pretty interesting, but sort of in line with the fact that a lot of his misses get something here. And of course, if he does have the super nuts and pocket kings, he's hopeful that I have pocket queens. So he's going to go ahead and bet it. He said it, maybe he set his trap on the flop with pocket kings. I didn't bite. So now he's just going to go ahead and bet. And I do think we just have a square call here.
Okay. I think it's interesting. I think maybe there's some merit. My first thought here was we can like raise fold, where we can raise the bluff, because I do think we can still get folds from like a lot of the hands that are beating us at this point. And we have like actually a pretty good bluff candidate now, because also when we raise, we're going to get folds from hearts some amount of the time. Not that he should have all that many hearts.
I don't know what hearts he has.
Well,
would he ever not bet hearts on the flop?
Maybe. Probably
it's really hard to think about what his range looks like because it's such a weird thing to check flop. But I feel like he would bet hearts.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking, we have such a weak hand from a showdown value perspective. And we didn't pick up that much equity, so it's kind of interesting. I'm okay with just calling, because again, we are getting a fantastic price.
Yeah, we do have if not the direct odds to call, like pretty close.
Definitely implied odds. If we assume that villain will stack off a lot on an ace or a 9, then we should definitely make a call.
Which he probably, even with pocket kings, for example, or pocket queens, he probably should be stacking.
He definitely will, I would say.
Yeah. So I do see the merit. I do think raising is interesting. And I mean, if he's just stabbing here and we fold out his stabs, if he has like ace 5 of clubs, like,
yeah, well, that's super good for us.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit interesting. There's kind of a dynamic where if he's got a stab like that, he wants to turn into sort of a multi-street bluff, and he continues on the river. We're just going to be like total toast. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
we have a horrid hand to like bluff shove.
Right. Exactly. And we can't really. It's tough to shove the river, and obviously we can't really call rivers. So that kind of makes me want to raise a bit more just to get. Because we lose to like most of his bluffs, probably.
That's a fair point.
So it interesting, but as you say, we do have the odds. So I would guess this is a fairly marginal spot where either action is reasonable.
Yeah, and if we do again take the solver with a grain of salt here, but the solver does like to bet a third pot on the turn in villain spot, and with its entire range actually, and from my seat, there's a huge mixture of plays. There is some calling, there is some raising, and there's of course some folding. And so it's not like we could take our entire range for any of those. But for the most part, the solver isn't raising a lot of the open-ended straight draws, aside from. But it is doing a bit of raising with my hand specifically, with Jack 10 of clubs. However, the EV of calling is better. So
Perfect.
It does like to call. Again, you can take the solver with a grain of salt here, but by and large, it seems to prefer to raise here with flush draws and combo draws.
Yep.
Which sense. Kind of makes sense.
Just because ranges are so condensed in 4-bet pots. Well, anyway, we've now got 57 in the pot. We got 87 behind, and the river is going to make us the nuts.
The 4 of hearts.
Yeah.
Not the nuts. Villain checks.
Well.
Yep.
Tough spot. I feel like we're in a really crappy spot. Because I don't think we can really check back here.
I don't think so. I think I don't know what the correct like check back type of hands are. Like probably like ace queen or something like that. Like we have very few hands that haven't made at least a pair here.
Right. Like king queen suited I think is a okay check back, because honestly I don't know how we're getting value from a whole lot worse with king queen suited.
Fair. Yeah, we have a lot of hands here that check back just fine. So, in terms of like, complete give ups, like, I don't know, maybe this is supposed to be one, but I didn't really want to check back Jack high. I thought he mustn't be that strong given his check.
Okay.
I decided to bet here. I don't know if you think that that's reasonable.
I think betting is fine. Yeah, we're so low in our range, and we don't really have that many relevant blockers. It's like but we don't. I don't think villain ever is checking a flush here.
Right.
So maybe that means we're allowed to just like jam.
Yeah, and that is actually what the solver does, is jam.
Just because the villain has kind of capped themselves to not really having flushes when they check the flop and check the river, whereas we can definitely be checking back flush draws. We can be just calling with some flush draws on the turn and getting here in this manner. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think jamming makes a lot of sense, even though it is an overbet.
Yep.
I think villain is very capped, and we can have a lot of nuts here. But I actually don't jam. I end up betting $43. Excuse me.
Okay.
Which is
3/4 pot, basically.
Yeah, basically I bet about 3/4 pot. And villain goes into the tank, and I'm like, this is interesting. Like, what's he thinking about here? I assume I'm getting snapped off by a set. But then villain shoves.
Okay. Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, so we go ahead and lay it down, of course, at this point,
Did we get to see what he had?
No, I'm so bummed.
Yeah, because, I really wonder, maybe he just had a set and he decided you could be doing this with a worse set or 2 pair or something enough because you would be shoving your own. And I think villain rightly kind of decided that you'd be shoving My guess is villain probably had a set and essentially decided, well, you'd probably be shoving flushes, which means it looks a lot like you're trying to go for thin value with like a lower set. So
I'd probably shove a set here, to be honest.
well, then we definitely should be shoving our bluffs.
Yeah, I don't know that I would have found it in game. Like I guess what I'm saying is I think I should be shoving sets here. But I don't know that I would have found it in game. I definitely should have shoved with my Jack 10. As it happens, I very likely would have immediately been called.
But that's poker.
Yeah.
If you don't get snap called by the nuts, you're not bluffing enough.
Exactly. So anyway, I think it was a pretty mediocre played hand by myself. Very weirdly played hand by villain. So.
Yes. Really, really interesting. Okay, I've got another hand. It is another hand from Encore, Boston Harbor. This is one of these tables that I was talking about where people are a little bit more aware. Had a nice time with some folks that I've seen. Shared the podcast, so I hope some of you were listening. You seemed like the type of people who might.
That's an insult. Ooh, brutal.
More like how about the type of person who just wants to. The type of person who wants to consume as much poker content as you can, even if it's of questionable quality.
Yeah, there we go.
You
would watch a podcast that would make you a worse player.
So, in this hand, UTG is going to limp. We are playing 500 effective in this hand, so quite deep. 170 big blinds, but of course the open is going to be to 15 in this hand, so as you say, maybe playing more like it's 100 big blinds effective. But under the gun limps. Under the gun +1 raises to 15. He is a reasonable player. He's been playing somewhat aggressively. As I talk to him, I don't think he is he's not a professional, but he's definitely a thinking player. I think he's more in like our boat, where like he has a job and a significant other and plays poker when he has time. But he was raising a lot, wasn't doing a lot of limping. Thinking player, very fun table. I look down next to act, so middle position with ace of clubs, queen of diamonds, and I decide to 3-bet.
Okay. Yeah. Seems fine.
So I make it 50.
Would you ever flat here? Do you ever flat for middle position versus an early position open?
I mean, I would say it depends on the table. Like, if it's a super, super passive table, then sure, I'm probably flatting some, like, pocket pairs.
Okay. Like
medium to weak pocket pairs. If I think there is like literally a 0% chance that I get 3-bet, unless someone wakes up with aces or kings, then yes, I'm absolutely doing some flatting. Not at this table. There's enough players that are thinking and a little bit more aggressive.
Okay, I do think this is a reasonable hand to flat sometimes if you have a flatting range.
Yeah, and I did think about that, and I know we've kind of discussed that before, that, you know, ace-queen can reasonably call a squeeze from somebody else. And is an okay flat, but I kind of decide I don't actually have like a well-built flatting range, so at that point I'd rather just be 3-betting.
Perfectly reasonable. So, all right, you make it 45, I assume?
So I make it 50 because there is a limper in the pot, and it's like, you know, just next to act, so I do want a little bit more fold equity against some of the players behind me.
Sure.
Like, because there's also, you know, the whole odds thing with a limper in. But of course that doesn't matter. The hijack immediately cold calls.
Awesome.
And everybody else folds, including the original raiser.
Oh.
So there's going to be about
some live poker.
So there's going to be 120 in the pot with about 450 behind. And the hijack, I would say, was maybe playing a little bit loose.
Sounds like it.
As you may be able to tell. He was also playing quite aggressively. He also definitely appeared to be a relatively thinking player. He was fairly aggressive. He was like definitely thinking about the game to some extent, but liked seeing flops. And who can blame him? I have seen far too many flops in my young career.
Okay. All right. So, and you have ace of clubs, queen of diamonds, correct?
Exactly. And we are off to a flop, which comes ace high. Ace of hearts, jack of spades, 3 of hearts.
Okay, 3 of hearts. Okay. Sounds like a board you should bet.
I do bet, and I decide to bet 35.
Okay, which is about a quarter pot-ish.
It's a third pot, basically, because the pot is 120 before the rake, which means it's 110 after the rake. So it's basically it's almost exactly a third pot.
Yeah, I mean, usually you want to continue with a small sizing on these ace high boards when you three bet. That's
Yeah,
just
and I kind of figure villain's gonna have a lot of like pocket pairs, as we say. It's mostly gonna be like, villains sometimes cold call three bets with like ace king ace queen, sometimes with suited broadways, but often weighted towards sort of high to middle pocket pairs like jacks through eights.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate.
So obviously, if he has pocket jacks, he has pocket jacks, but I'm well ahead of most of his range at this point. I do want to get value. There are a lot of hands to get value from, so I bet 35, and villain calls.
Okay, so villain calls, which is going to put the pot at close to 170, and we're going to have about 410, 420 behind, right? So
and yeah,
that's a little. That's like 2.5x pot, right?
Yeah, it's 2 1/3 maybe. It's just a little bit over 2. And this is kind of my first question: is this a hand that wants to be playing for stacks at our stack depth against villain's range? And this is kind of where I started kind of thinking, because I kind of thought as the turn rolled off, and I'll tell you the turn is a 4 of spades, which is a pretty darn big brick. It does bring in a backdoor flush draw, but shouldn't really change anything as is. My thought at this point is my hand does not really want to play for stacks. Given villain's range, I don't think I'm ever getting 3 streets of value from a worse hand.
Interesting.
But I don't know. This is I was definitely like in a weird spot, because I was like I'm definitely not getting 3 streets of value from a pocket pair or a jack. Probably, honestly, not even getting 3 streets of value from like ace, like a wheel ace.
I don't know that's right. I don't know that you're right, because first of all, the reason I was asking about like a stack to pot ratio. If you're going to bet geometrically, meaning bet the same percent of the pot on the turn and river, you only have to bet 3/4 pot both times,
Right.
Which is not huge. Like that's not crazy to think that someone will call. I mean, that's sort of the point of betting geometrically, is you force villain to defend with the widest possible part of their range on all streets. So I don't think it's crazy that like queens or not jacks, like queens would call you twice. I don't think it's crazy to think that king jack would call you twice more. I do think that they probably, I mean, they might even be supposed to be honest. Like, I don't think it's crazy, especially if this guy is the sort of player who's cold calling 3 bets. I don't know that it's wild to think he would do that. I do think that you don't have to be particularly polar to play for stacks here also.
True.
So, like, you are going to value own yourself sometimes against like ace king. I would say would be the most common thing you're going to value own yourself against. But if this guy's an aggressive player, how much ace king does he have flatting your 3 bet? So
yeah,
I would play for stacks here. I'd bet 75.
Okay, I think that's reasonable. I was kind of thinking, yeah, I do think I have the best hand here most of the time. Like, I don't think he has ace king or pocket. I mean, I don't think he does have ace king that much. He doesn't have many combos of pocket jack, so be it, right?
I think he's going to raise, if not all of them, some of them.
Yeah, exactly. So I do think I have the best hand here the majority of the time. I just don't know that I'm getting, like, especially on live poker, like maybe in online poker where everybody's like, or higher stakes where people are actually like bluffing at the right frequency and forcing people to call down. But maybe I'm just too used to people just way over folding in live poker, and kind of thought, well, how am I going to make the most this hand? I feel like if I bet like all 3 streets, I'm going to probably getting fold like on the turn from like any sort of like random pair most of the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if you were deep, I would be very careful here. I would be very careful about playing this hand aggressively. But you're not. So I'm happy to put it in with top pair second kicker here.
Well, but then I think you're probably right, that we should just, we pretty much, if we always have the best hand, why not go for it?
Right.
But I check.
Yeah, you check. Yeah, I actually think checking here is quite bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 flush draws.
Well, yeah, that's part of it. And the other thing, too, is on the turn especially, but in general, the out of position player's checking range is supposed to be quite polar, and this is very mergy. I would bet. I think you could just bet. I think you might want to check. You could look especially if you think this guy's aggressive. Let's say you had like pocket jacks. You could check pocket jacks. Sometimes I think you could check ace jack sometimes because you're blocking a lot of action. I think you could, and then you could also check. With plans to check raise, obviously.
Yeah,
and some draws, but
and I also think I could like check river on a brick if I think he's sufficiently aggressive, where he's gonna like barrel off a lot of missed draws. If I think that my hand, if I only want 2 streets of value from worse, and I can only get 2 streets of value from worse, probably makes more sense to check river.
Absolutely, that's actually a really good point. So, whereas in the turn, you let him realize his equity out. So,
and he does check back immediately.
Yeah. So, bummer. All right.
The river is now going to come the 2 of clubs. So the draw's brick. There is now a 1-liner to a 5 as the board is ace, jack, 3, 4, deuce. Not particularly worried about a 5.
Yeah, if this guy has a 5, he can have my money.
Yes. And now I think I should bet.
Agreed.
I think I probably should have taken a fairly large sizing here.
I guess, do you think he will bluff river like this player if you check?
I don't know. Well, I think he might have started bluffing turn is the thing. Like, I feel that when he checks back turn, his range is pretty weighted towards like pocket pairs or maybe weak aces. And probably pocket pairs because most weak aces... Like, most wheel aces were 2 pairs. And now most wheel aces are either 2 pairs or... all wheel aces are beating me. But I think his range is fairly weighted towards, like, pocket pairs at this point.
Okay, so if you think he has, what they call a mid-heavy range, I mean, he's got a lot of hands that just kind of want to see showdown, then yeah, you definitely want to use a large size and put it in a tough spot. So, since you did check turn, which is... technically, I mean, you are uncapped here, I would say. You can have a lot of strong hands, so I think taking a large sizing with even this hand makes sense. I would say, I don't know if you would overbet, do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't really think you're supposed to overbet a ton out of position, too.
That could be, yeah. I'm not familiar with those spots. But, yeah, certainly you could bet pot, for example.
Yeah, well, I don't. I bet 100.
Oh, okay.
But I may have inadvertently bumbled my way into making the maximum because he just tanks for ages. And he's like, oh, what could you possibly have here? Do you ever do this with pocket tens? Do you miss? Why'd you check the turn? And eventually, like, Sai calls with his hand literally hovering over the muck and is disappointed when I give him the bad news.
Damn. All right, so good thing you didn't bet pot.
Yeah, I do think he probably... Well, I don't know, though, because maybe if I bet pot, the exact same thing happens.
Right.
Or maybe he even calls faster because he's like, oh, why would you bet so big? Like, this is such a weird line from, like, a one-pair hand.
Yeah.
So that does not necessarily mean I made the maximum or shouldn't have bet pot because I definitely could... but I may have been able to get paid and have the exact same sequence go. Or I may have been able to stack him. So, good example of me not doing what I should have done.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Bottom line, you made some money, so
well,
good work, but
bottom line, I don't know if that's the right.
Bottom line, terribly played hand.
Thank you. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me cap us off here with a very fun one. This hand was one of those hands that I was just like, I hate poker so much. Both like partly because I like played it so badly, but also. You'll see. So. And
is this 25.50 again?
This is 25-cent, 50-cent. Yep, this is an online game.
It's not $25, $50?
No, it is not. And we are $110 effective to start the hand.
Deep.
A little over 200 big blinds. And we are sitting in the hijack with 8 of hearts, 8 of spades. The under the gun +2 player. This is a 9-handed game. The under the gun +2 player makes it $2. Again, bigger than the normal open, but hit this player in particular, this was his normal open. I don't know why.
Perfect.
This player is a nit.
He's been nit tagged.
Yeah, this player is a nit. And
shout out to Corn.
Corn, you're the biggest nit ever. We make it $6 over his open. He folds to because he is a nit. You can get him to fold with some 3 bets. And so we make it $6. Uh, and it then gets to the button, who is a fun player. It's Dobble. Shout out to Dobble, my boy.
Oh, we love Double. Double is
Yeah.
a great player for the game, and he often walks away with a profit.
Yeah, Dobble's the man. So he goes ahead and cold calls my 3-bet on the button. And it folds back to the big blind, who also calls.
And now the nit is just going to
Nit
tank.
is in.
Nit now tanks and decides they're priced in and calls with their pocket tens.
Yeah. So
Okay, so poker.
Poker.
We got 24 in the pot, and we have got 104 behind.
Yeah.
All
But
right.
that's okay, Josh. You know why? Because the flop comes 8 of diamonds, 7 of hearts, deuce of diamonds.
We have the nuts
We got the nuts.
on a board where our hand is quite vulnerable.
Definitely.
Okay.
So it checks to me, as one might expect, and I do bet here. I would be doing a lot of checking on this board, but I will bet sometimes, and this is one of those times. I make it 750.
Okay, and I think we should probably go half pot here. If half pot, we should be betting big here. If we're not
Even
betting
into 3 people?
what? Well,
Even
I was about to say, if we're multi-way, I think big is sort of half pot.
Okay.
So I would probably bet as sort of big as we're allowed to. Like, I am not super up on multi-way theory. I've been playing online, and people do bet larger than half pot often on multi-way spots, but I don't necessarily give them credit for being more educated. But I know that we've kind of talked about using smaller sizings in general, right? But I still want to polarize. I mean, I still want to bet sort of as large as is allowed, given that we won't be doing a whole lot of betting here.
No, you're right. I guess my thought was, like, I am so like, betting here is just inherently really polar. So,
Of course it is, yeah.
So, like, I don't need to use a large sizing, but I don't know. I don't really know what's correct. I see your argument that, like, well, go bigger, like, if you can. Like, I don't really know what the theory is on this.
Right, like, obviously, I think you're not allowed to just, like, pot it, because then, like, everyone can just fold, like, pretty much everything. Like, people can just fold, like, overpairs if you pot it. But I think if you bet half pot, you do get more value, you clean up some equity, and you, like, build the pot.
Okay. Yeah, I also do want to say, like, the SPR is not that high, so it's like 4 SPR, so it's not like I need to bet that large to get money in also.
That's true.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm not worried about that. I'm more just, I mean, I just want to sort of set up for spots where we can, like, jam turn, charge draws, stuff like that.
No, I do think you're right that a larger sizing is probably in order here. I've lately been just in the habit of always going small multi-way, but there probably are spots where it's correct to go bigger. And if there are spots, this is one of the spots.
Yeah,
so.
I still try to vary my multi-way sizing, and maybe that's wrong because I don't really know. But, like, more like by board, not by hand, right? Where a hand where, like, a board that's like ace 7 deuce, of course I'm going to be betting small with like a lot of hands. Still not all in a multi-way spot probably, but a lot. And I hit a board like this where I'm going to be doing a lot of checking. I do still try and think, how often am I betting here, and adjust my bet size.
Yeah.
But hey, you just listened to the last stand. Don't take my word for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I won't listen to anything you just said.
So we bet 750, and all 3 players call.
Button calls. And everyone else folds.
Damn. I was hopeful for a real live poker situation here.
Yeah, no, so I'm not excited that the one player who's in position to me called next to act with 2 people behind. But I am thinking, like, hey, I have the nuts, so that's okay.
It's a good thing to think. All right, off to a turn.
The turn is the 5 of hearts.
Okay, that's a pretty safe card.
Well, yeah, it is, but in the moment, I was thinking, like, I think it's bad for me in a number. Like, I think it's bad for my range, probably. I don't know.
I think it's range. I think it's kind of neutral, because Because neither player should okay. So just to recap, the board right now is 8 of diamonds, 7 of hearts, deuce of diamonds, 5 of hearts. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Neither player should have pocket fives.
Definitely not.
Neither player should really have 6-9.
I think it is possible.
I mean, it was a 3-bet and a cold call, so I would say.
I think it is possible, given the nature of this game, that someone could be goofing around with 6-9.
It might be more likely for you. It might be more likely for you. But anyway, in general,
I could maybe have some 6-9 here once in a while if I've had a few drinks in me.
I would say when we bet, I just don't think it changes that much. I don't think either player should really have any card that really interacts with this 5, except maybe a heart draw, and that's not actually a hand. So I want to bet big here.
Do you want to bet, or would you check to look to check raise, assuming that button is fairly strong and will bet this card, which is wet?
I think I want to bet, because I think that villain might check back. Because we bet into 4 people, I think that villain might check back some draws.
Interesting.
A good amount of draws, just because, to realize their equity, because, your line is very, very strong.
But you have to think that, most draws villain will have here don't have a ton of showdown value. Obviously there's ace high diamond draws, but that's about it. A lot of most of the straight draws, for example, are just gonna be very incentivized to bets, of which there are a bunch. Obviously there's 9-10 and jack-9, although probably mostly jack-9 of diamonds specifically, but even so they probably would want to bet that hand. So I think there is a good amount of betting villain would do here.
Yeah, that's certainly.
And if they have a set sevens that they're slow playing, they're definitely going to bet.
Yeah, but if they have a set or any other value hand, we're just going to make the most by betting.
That's true. I guess what I'm saying is, doesn't checking work well against both parts of the range? I mean, what are the hands they have here that are highly incentivized to check back? Top pair, I guess.
If they have top pair, or even nine, if villain has 9s or 10s or jacks, we, kind of like we said earlier, cold calling if they're cold calling a 3-bet with that. Although knowing this opponent somewhat, I would guess that those hands might quite possibly would be put in a cold 4-betting range.
It's very possible.
And quite reasonably too, because I think you should be definitely should be cold 4-betting jacks from the button.
100%, yeah.
Probably 10s too, and probably 9s at some amount.
Yeah, so.
But I don't know. I think I just want to bet. I think I just want to keep putting money in this pot while we're sure we're ahead. And I really don't think this card is bad for us, is I think the key.
Yeah, I think this is a weakness in my game where I see straightening looking cards and I assume that they're bad, that they're going to complete some straights, but I don't really take the time to think through what the straights would be.
Well, and it's also interesting because it is such a multi-way pot. Even if this card were the 6 of hearts, then we could make the case that it's bad. But our primary, a lot of our bluffing range should probably be hands 9-10 also, right? Because are you betting aces on this board? Are you betting aces?
No,
on
I'm
this
not
board
betting aces. No.
Then our range is very, very polar, right? Where we really are have a lot of sets, a lot of 2-pair, some flush draws, and probably some straight draws.
Right, and once you hyper polarize the flop, you're not really supposed to you're polar, so there's nothing you don't need to polarize check the turn. You can just bet. So yeah,
I didn't even think of that, but that's an interesting point too, that if we're already polarized for betting the flop, then we don't need to check the turn and polarize ourselves because we're already there.
Yeah, so I think that this is just supposed to be a bet. I actually think check raising here is fine too.
Yeah.
All that being said, I think the worst possible play is what I did, which is check call a bet of $20.
Oh, yes. Yes. I was going to say I totally agree with check raising. I just really don't want it to go check.
Yeah. So I check call, which I just think is ass. I don't know why I did that. I'll be honest.
Well, I have definitely done that before, but yeah, I really do not like this play. We now have just let opponent see a cheap river at their price with less than a pot size bet behind, with 2 flush draws.
About a pot size bet behind.
He bets 20. No. Oh yeah. No. We have 96.50 left, and the pot's 39 at this point. So when we call this bet, the pot becomes 79, and the stack becomes 76-ish.
I said about a pot. So.
Yeah. So there's slightly less, and I said less than. So we can both be technically correct.
We're both technically correct.
But anyway, no, I don't like this play. But okay.
I think it's really bad. I think check jamming here is probably what. Once I do check, I should check jam.
Yeah.
And if I definitely should just bet here. Like I don't know why I check called. I genuinely couldn't tell you. I think I was just like concerned about getting wrecked by a straight, but there really just aren't straights here. So I think this was just like an awfully played turn.
If someone has 6-9, give it to him.
That's fair.
Right? But anyway, I think I would not be surprised if you're supposed to or allowed to mix betting and checking. So I don't think checking is necessarily wrong. I'm sure check raising is fine. I'm not sure, but probably check calling is bad.
Check calling is for sure bad. I'm sure. So
well, let's get rewarded and make quads.
So the river comes the 10 of hearts.
That's not quads.
It's not quads. It's actually like probably the second worst card in the deck, the worst being the 10 of diamonds.
I would say like the 6 of diamonds probably wrecks our world the most.
Sure, yeah.
So now there is not, because there is not a one-liner to straight at this point on 8-7 deuce 5-10 with the backdoor heart draw coming in. But now if he did have like Jack 9 of diamonds, that got there.
Right. Yep, absolutely.
And now we probably have to check.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, what are we going to lead this card?
Block.
I mean, has our hand been downgraded to a block betting candidate? Even if it had.
I would say that I think it is important to balance your block betting range and put some strong hands into it. I think it's nice to have some block calls if you're going to have a blocking range on certain boards.
For sure.
But our hand probably isn't strong enough to block call and isn't weak enough to block. So yes,
That's kind of what I was.
Yeah, I see your point.
I think also generally you donk rivers usually when there's a card that's really favorable for you, which this is not.
Yeah.
So, because as you said, we do have some like 10-9 here probably, but this isn't great for that hand anyway. Even though we do make top pair, that's probably irrelevant. So, so we do check, and villain puts it in.
Yeah. It sucks. I think we have to call. I mean, our specific combo of 8s is like the best one we can have, where we have a heart and do not have a diamond. That's really good.
I agree. I think actually having this was what I thought in game was like that having the 8 of hearts is very good because a lot of hands he might play this way would be like a flush draw with the 8 of hearts. So
right, because I think given that like it was a 3-bet pot and then you bet flop into 3 people, that he can start bluffing the 8 on the turn because like it's rarely good.
Right.
Like or it's rarely good against your value hands, I should say.
Right.
So I think it makes sense for him to start bluffing with that hand. So I would agree that having the 8 of hearts is nice. And 8 of diamonds is actually on the board.
I think ace 8 and 9 8 of hearts are very legitimate hands here.
Yeah. Totally.
I don't know what better bluff catchers we have.
Yeah, I don't think we're betting pocket 10s a whole lot multi-way. Maybe we would be betting pocket 10s and then check calling. But then we wouldn't have a heart, so it might be worse.
Like pocket 10s with no heart.
Because the 10 is a heart, so I think 8s with a heart is probably better.
Yeah.
Because like I don't think it really changes the value unless villain gets here with pocket 10s, which is feasible.
Yeah, certainly a possible hand they could have.
But to your point, there's probably more like 8x of hearts type hands.
Yeah. So I don't know. I do call.
I think we have to call. I mean, I think. Do we ever have flushes here? Are we? I don't think there's any way we play 9-10 of hearts. Oh, we can't even play 9-10 of hearts this way. So I don't even know what flushes we would have here, where we bet flop, check call turn, and check river. I think we probably are near the top of our range.
Yeah. So we do put it in.
And this is also, by the way, a spot where we can definitely be balanced on the turn with our check jamming, because we could check jam with like 9-10 of hearts, for example, or 9-10 of diamonds if we do decide to play our range as sort of a check versus a bet.
Yeah. No, so definitely bad turn play gets punished maximally by the river, in which we do call and we lose to Jack 9 of hearts.
Oh, so he double got there.
Double got there. He super duper got there. I was blocking him from having a straight flush, unfortunately for him.
The poor guy.
Poor guy. Yeah, so definitely got wrecked. Probably if we had bet turn, I mean,
I think the hand might turn out the same way,
yeah,
but I don't think we should let him see the free river, right? If we jam turn and he calls and he gets there, that is completely fine, right? We want to if we get it in while we're ahead, then we can be happy with our play. Once the chips leave your hand, that's it, right? So
it's into poker god's hands. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can't be mad about a player about a good player getting there.
Yeah, Bob was the man. It couldn't have gone to a better guy. So, but we definitely got wrecked, and I was pretty bummed.
Yep, fair enough.
So all right, well that just about does it for us. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you didn't like and subscribe when I asked you to earlier, then I know you're going to now. And you're going to leave a comment, right, guys?
And I think your comment should probably accost us of playing double flush draw turns so passively.
So badly.
Like if there's a theme to this episode, it's don't do that.
Don't merge your turn checking range.
Don't merge your turge.
That's really the lesson to be learned here.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and really appreciate it. We'll talk to you later.
See you next week.